Awesome. Thank you, Kim. So
Yep.
we'll call the meeting to order at 10:04. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Hearing none. Next up is approval of our September 23 minutes. Someone willing to make that motion?
So moved.
Moved by Jason, second by Loretta. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
I'll
Next.
abstain just because this is my first meeting.
An abstention from Tom. And Tom, I apologize. It looks like while you were on the invitation, you weren't on the team's invitation, so I've since rectified that.
Thank you.
Approval of the minutes from September 30th. Is someone willing to offer a motion for that?
Yes, so moved. Sorry.
Moved by Jason, second by Loretta. Any discussion, changes? Hearing none. All in favor say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. And Tom, I assume you're abstaining as well?
Yes.
All right. All right. So next up is our discussion of opportunities for the March 2025 Academy. This is a kind of a continuation of the discussion from the 30th. Tom, just for your edification, since this is your first meeting here, our group is working on two goals. Goal number one is making recommendations for the March class. What are things that we could reasonably do or attain to make changes in minimizing liability to the academy and or council for the March class? And then what's the long-term view of the level 2 program? So that's kind of what we're talking about with that. Was
Gotcha.
looking.
I did receive the previous minutes as well. Terry.
Okay. With that, I found a document. I'm trying to open it up now, which was some of our notes from one of our first meetings. And what was interesting with it was there was a reflection on tax recommendation, which is basically the recommendation. And Jason, if you can say it more better than I can, it was the academy should do more, but there's also the follow-up to that was there wasn't a reasonable way to accomplish what the recommendation was. Is that a fair summary?
So it was that the program is inadequate. It needs to be expanded substantially, I think was some of the terminology. I haven't read this in a while, but didn't know how to go about it. Really, it was more of a problem identification than anything else. It wasn't a solution. It was making the problem known. And I think we land now in the seat trying to come up with a solution.
So one of the things that I know if Chris were here to talk about is saying not only should our report make the recommendations of what we think needs to be changed, but also what are the resource requirements to do that. I don't, no one in the legislative cycle, I don't see, unless anybody has a different feeling, I don't see how we can make any financial requests of the legislature for the March 2025 Academy and realize it by March 2025. Which means we're doing the same problem solving with what we have now. Last meeting, we talked about moving around some of the phase 1, phase 2 training to accomplish some liability mitigation around use of force. do we feel comfortable moving in that direction? And that's a question for the committee members and academy staff.
And sorry, Chair, I'm not a committee member. Chris did ask for me to share some of his thoughts that came out of a meeting at the academy. But Ken, I don't want to jump in front of you if you want to take the lead on this.
I'm assuming you had a conversation with Chris yesterday. I want to make sure that I don't step on what his desire for this to look like might be. I think the academy staff is more than happy and willing to, at our own peril, do some sort of an expansion where use of force might be concerned, to bring it at least in the same gravitational pull as the level 3. And I think what Chris's last thought might have been was a look at an expansion of up to a week for the current level 2 program, bringing it to 3 weeks in total. That would include additional use of force training. And I think he was also hoping that we could do a day of both practical exercises along with evaluations of those exercises, to get somewhere where we could say straight-faced that after patrol procedures is done, we've actually had the opportunity to have them practice some of those basic skills and then give them a go, no-go, I don't want to call it an evaluation, but assessment, for lack of a better term, saying that they've at least met these very minimum standards based on the training that we've been able to provide so far. Kim, is that close to what we were saying?
Exactly. So what we at the academy, we wanted to be able to come to this group to your point, Mark, like what could we realistically do with our current resources, and what do we feel sort of a top level change for March that would look like a substantial addressing issues that we know are there. So at the minimum of 3 days of use of force, with the idea that, and again, Ken, correct me if I get any of these terms wrong, that the 2 days of baton and CEW could be done later, just as it is, but do the 3 days of in-person work at the academy, and then having a day or two, depending on timing, to get into some scenarios. This conversation came out of following our last meeting of sort of looking at the 2 weeks, what classes could we move around? What could we move forward? What could we move back? And even though we do still think there's some wiggle room, and Jason spoke to the report writing and that we can rearrange that and free up some time there. But at the end of our conversation, we just don't feel like we can jam it all into 2 weeks. And we wanted to put out to this group whether folks could support the idea of expanding it to 3 weeks so that we could get the use of force in there. We could get some scenarios there. We can still rearrange a bit to push, depending on what this group comes out with, rearrange some of the classwork for those first 2 weeks to make those scenarios feel useful, to feel like we're getting somewhere. And one trade-off that we thought of was Ken highlighted that there was a number of courses in phase 2, like hazmat, first aid, fire extinguisher, all this coursework that's done online, that we could open up and allow agencies to allow their officers to do before even coming, and sort of trade off some time there and give an opportunity when you hire someone to be able to get them doing something while waiting for their phase 1 class to start. So we were playing around with those ideas and wanted to put that out to this group to see whether or not, the big question, right, is could folks swallow the idea of 3 weeks? Like, does that suddenly blow apart everything, or could we do that? That's the biggest question, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be very clear, and I was asking committee members and staff, so I wasn't trying to be exclusive of anybody in this meeting if that was not communicated. I've had some feedback from people in past meetings saying they weren't sure if they should speak or not. And given the turnout to these meetings, I want to be as broadly open to members of the public, academy staff, and committee members as best we can, because we have a lot of work to do, and I think there's a lot of stakeholders. So just, Kim, thank you for all of that. Just very briefly, I'll say I think that will blow things apart for sheriffs. Happy to expound at least for the March class, does adding in a third week in some way, shape, or form change things if it were phase 1 versus phase 2? Maybe not. So I think, like, if we take the current phase 1 model where it's 2 weeks, fill that in with 80 hours of training, and then we have a third week, which is defensive tactics, use of force training. I mean, it's the same model. Having it 3 consecutive weeks, I think, would be problematic for sheriffs because of who they're hiring.
Is it, so is the consecutive part the piece, like, is there room of bringing folks back? Of, like, what sort of time, like, if it was 3 days or 2 days, a week, and, broken up, like, is there any sort of wiggle room there within, like, not too large of a time frame? Like, where's the play there, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a good discussion to have what the wiggle room is to say this is phase 1 versus phase 2 training. Does that mean if they've completed 2 weeks of phase 1 and then they're back home for a month and then they go do a week of training, they're still phase 1 and they're not provisionally certified till they complete that? That's probably problematic and wonky. Versus saying, are there things like report writing that could be phase 2, they're low liability impact, and they can be delivered afterward in an in-service model. Just speaking of 2 people I currently have going through provisional, they have full-time jobs. They do training on Monday and Tuesday or Thursday and Friday, whatever their schedules fit. So to deliver the week-long defensive tactics training is a little hard to send them to the academy to get it, even though they need it. So now I'm paying an instructor to work with them on the 2 days that they can come to training, which is problematic for me as well, but that's more attainable than saying, leave your full-time job for a week.
I think we, on our end down here, we keep getting stuck between the opposing desires of agencies that want to get their people through yesterday, and they want them to have that additional or that increased training because they've hired them perhaps as a full-time officer as a level 2. So they want to get them spun up as quickly as they can, get them into FTO, get all those things done so they can get them on the road as quickly as they can, get the experience before they send them back to level 3. And then we've got the true reason for why we had the level 2 and the part-time to begin with, was that they are truly folks that have that full-time job and they're taking their vacation time and all that extra time to try to get that through. And it's a difficult proposition in either direction now. So we're kind of fighting 2 competing theories about how to make this work best for everyone. And I don't have an answer for that yet. We're kind of stuck.
I have a thought, and I found the notes that I think they're actually Kim's notes, but other people might want to speak, and I've already spoken. So are there anyone who wants to throw in thoughts? All right. Kim, if I'm wrongly attributing these notes to you, I apologize, and I will retract that. But I think they're from you.
Well, if
so-
they're good, they're mine. If they're not, then no idea.
They might be mine. I'll make this bigger. Oh, where did that go? Does this look like yours, Kim?
Yes, yep.
All right. So at the end of it, with one of our main goals being to reduce liability, I highlight the academy's perspective, which is it was never designed to train patrol officers, which I think the expansion of training, extending the academy, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, TAC's saying people are insufficiently trained to do patrol work.
Correct.
Is
That
it-
would, yes.
So then I go to Kim's second sentence, which is the Academy Council would reduce its liability by stating clearly design and purpose of the current level 2 program. Will we be better in defining this as a recommendation for the March Academy that we're not training them to do patrol work? And this might very much be an attorney question. Then to Ken's point, for that first group of people, the ones who go to level 2 while we're waiting for the level 3 class, we build out what I've previously called the patrol school, where we provide a week of EVOC training. We provide the extra week of training that's being mentioned, where agencies are employing this person full-time and they're using this as a stopgap measure versus the measure for about 4/5 of the work that level 2s were really designed to do. Dominica?
Hi. So I think, and forgive me, like, show some of my ignorance in kind of the process and how things go. But when we're talking about this training and they're on other agencies, have they been employed provisionally by an agency, but they're still working another job and they're not performing any of those job activities until they have fully completed the academy? Or are they quasi working for agencies performing some? I guess I'm not clear about how that, where they're working in other places, or are they working for an agency while this process is happening?
So, and Ken can probably speak to it really well, but just speaking, because I used one of my people as an example, I employ a guy who has a business in computer security and graphics design. Former police officer, injured himself on the job, wants to stay in it, but also because of some of his circumstances, he's limited. So he doesn't do any patrol work, but he can do a lot of the other jobs that we have based on the disability he has. So that's one example. But then I think there's also agencies. I know that Brattleboro PD hired people as level 2s who they are putting into field training. They're working them, getting them exposure and experience. They're full-time employed by the department while they're waiting for the level 3 class to come. So that's a way to secure a candidate where they would get hired by a surrounding agency, Keene PD, Greenfield PD. They're able to hire them, train them before the next level 3, which in this case won't be till what, February, Ken? So we have both tracks.
But if you're waiting for the level 2, that certification or that academy, are you working for an agency before that happens or during that process or not?
So employment begins day 1 of the academy. There might be like a day or two for administrative stuff, taking IDs and W-2s, or I'm sorry, W-4s and all those things. But generally speaking, the employment will be starting at the academy. They graduate the academy, and that's where they'll begin their true employment. If they can't complete training, they would be dismissed because it's part of a conditional offer of employment.
So when you say if it was that 3-week consecutive and that extra week is a problem, is it a problem with, it's not a problem with their employment with their own agency. You're talking it's their problem with their employment with another job that they may have?
Yes.
Okay.
And just for historical context, this used to be called the part-time certification versus the full-time certification, which are now level 2 and level 3 respectively. These have very much been used in part-time context where, say, a parade is going to be happening on July 4th. We need an extra 10 people, but we don't really need 10 people all the time. Low exposure environments, but then over time it's evolved into, well, court security, transports, super load escorts, just all these other things where it's very much that ever evolving demand on personnel, and you never know when it's going to be. So do we invest tens of thousands of dollars into training a person where there might be no work this year, which is what my agency dealt with, or do I have a reserve force which I can tap into when demand is higher, but they're generally in low risk environments? And I say that low risk in a liability context, not necessarily a physical security context.
Got it. Thanks.
Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Not to muddy the waters, on the judiciary side, that there are sheriff's departments who will reach out to me and they'll say, well, we've got someone hired now. The academy's not for a few months. Can they be in the courts and shadow existing security or judiciary personnel for training purposes, which I allow. They aren't there in an official capacity and they're not uniformed, but it's a way to bridge the hiring time prior to the academy starting. And then on the flip side, as Mark had said, we have a lot of people who still want to be certified, but they want to be off the road. And the nature of the court calendars is particularly challenging because there's a per diem need where it could be they're needed 1 day a week, and that's because it's arraignment day or there's a higher load at a specific court, and that's a routine thing, and it's very difficult to hold an employee for that. But this level 2 capacity to fill that on this per diem basis has been the recipe that's allowed that to happen. But as I'm sure Mark can attest, it's a difficult thing to track.
Mark, I think the issue becomes, and I understand what you're saying, and even though this program was designed to create designed for officers to only be able to do so much, the issue is that if they're certified as a level 2 officer, their scope is what's laid out in statute. So, right, so I think our concern would be, even if we said that, like, yes, we cover the council by saying, look, this program was intended to do this, but since the program isn't matching what the scope of authority is, it helps us a little bit. It puts agencies on notice, and then, truly, and I'm not the lawyer for agencies, but agencies have the bigger liability here than the council. Like, you're the ones who are going to be sued first, and maybe you then turn around and try to put a little bit back on us. But it's the agencies that now are clearly aware there's a deficiency and are then saying, we don't mind. We'll take what we can get here, and that's the biggest problem. So unless we made the statement of, this current training allows an officer to do the scope of a level 1 officer, that's different, if we're going to call it that.
So I was thinking, as I was going through this over the weekend, because yes, I have no life, I was thinking about that, and I'm pretty sure two things. One is that I completely agree that the agencies are holding the liability here, and there be, I assume the two broad lawsuits would be failure to train or failure to supervise. And I could see where the academy/council would be concerned about exposure from that end, and certainly that's going to be something for state and or the AG's legal counsel to develop. But the second part is, I believe under our enabling statutes, there's language that allows the council to establish by rule training requirements. And so I look at this in the same context of DUI enforcement. While level 2 has the authority, they don't have the training. Generally speaking, death investigation, a level 3 has the authority, but they don't have the training. And most states' attorneys have intervened in that method to say they have their own process for doing it. And so my state's attorney has a list of who's blessed to submit death investigation reports and who is not. So I think we might have authority as a council, and this might be an opportunity for recommendation in our rules to say level 2 might provide the scope of authority, but the council's restricting these abilities unless you complete EVOC training, you complete a week-long patrol procedures training, the 40-hour crash investigation training, something like that. Jason. You're muted.
Okay, sorry, I have too many buttons at the same time. Kim spoke to this a little bit, and I wonder, Mark, for your scenario where you have this employee who's not going to do patrol work, it sounds like, could the existing level 2 class or some form of it, the 2-week program, we rename it level 1 for those people, and then those who want true level 2 to do patrol type work, can we have the expanded model? They just stay at the academy longer. I don't know if that is a workable, because level 1's really never been instituted, if I
Correct.
understand correctly.
Yeah, so level 1's actually our next agenda item, and I'm happy to talk on that, but Dominica.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel like we have a responsibility to the officers that we're training. I mean, there is financial liability, of course, for agencies, but there's personal criminal liability also for officers, and they should feel like they know the rules, so that, because I didn't know is not a defense, and I'm just concerned that there may be these issues that come up for review, and if they're not trained on this in these scenario-based things like the level 3s are, that, just to make sure that we're fulfilling that responsibility to give them the tools they need to do what we're asking them to do.
Anyone else? Tom?
Yeah, so I just listening to this, I've been really struggling with the 2 versus 3-week thing. My basis of knowledge would be like the National Guard, right? You join, then they send you away to a full-time school so that you can get the base level. You go to your basic training, and then you come back to do your job and you resume your full-time job, but you at least have those core competencies in being a soldier or Marine or whatever. And I realize that those are protected. Like your employer has to allow you to leave for that, but I don't feel like 3 weeks is a huge ask. If they can do 2, they could probably do 3. Their employer would probably let them go for 3. And if they're not, then actually, Jason, I really like that idea of breaking up the level 1 versus level 2, so that level 1 could maybe be that lower level, and then when they can break away for 3 weeks, go to that. But you're right. The reality is we have level 2 certs working in full-time capacity. We have level 2 certified people working as supervisors full-time in agencies in this state. So they really need to have the full, not the level 3, but they need to have enough training to be able to function on patrol and be able to, look at affidavits and lead people in that capacity who are level 3, because that's just the reality of our state.
Loretta?
So I guess one of the things that is they're not actually certified. They can work with another officer until they're certified, do their FTO and stuff. So I guess one of the concerns is they're working with another officer that might only be part-time certified. Maybe we could limit their, they can only do FTO hours until they're certified. They can actually work with, a second officer on a detail, or maybe it's a level 1 detail and they can do that. I mean, just throwing that out there. Because while they're doing FTO, they're not allowed to work by themselves at all anyway. So that was just my thought. unless it's a level 1 thing, they can't work by themselves. So like they could do courthouse maybe since there's another officer there, or it's a level 1, or something, but, limit that and that maybe we up the hours so that are required for the FTO program, because 60 hours is not enough. My FTOs go through way more than that. I don't limit them to, I want to make sure that they're trained. So, we go until until I feel they're comfortable doing the job. So,
So just going back to the enabling statute, it's 20 VSA 2358, which I'll throw in chat. And I'm sure this is not the most ideal language, but no less what I'm referencing is sub B that says, let's see, sub B 1B little I. The scope of practice of a level 1 law enforcement officer shall be limited except that a level 1 officer may do which is basically intervene and call for an adult. This is where I'm thinking the council could use its authority to say these are the limitations for it. Level 2 has slightly different but similar constrictions that the council has the authority to define, and this is where if we're comfortable moving into the level 1 conversation, I'm happy to do that, but I also don't want to cut off anyone's opportunity to talk about the March 25 class. So going once, going twice, we're moving on to level 1. So Jason, I don't see the sheriffs being opposed to that. In fact, we've asked for level 1 certifications for quite some time. It solves most of our problems. What the makeup of level 1 is probably would be very similar to what the current level 2 class is. And so then the question becomes, does the March 25 class become a level 1 class or a level 2 class? And I don't want to go back to March 25 right now, but to say, I don't think we would be opposed to it. I think that there's still some opportunity to rearrange the schedule to fit a level 1 class, such as having the defensive tactics incorporated into phase 1. I think that still makes sense. We have firearms in phase 1. We should have non-lethal use of force in phase 1, and maybe again build out pepper spray and baton as separate in-service classes. Would they need EVOC? Probably not. I think defensive driving for level 1 type activities could be taught in an agency without there being any significant risk to the agency. And agencies could identify where they want to send certain people for it. But for example, we have a court officer working at one of the courthouses. They're not driving a car. So generally speaking, I think it would be okay. There are some duties level 1s do that would be operating an emergency vehicle, but they're not really operating at high speeds or in the ways that emergency vehicles are usually operated for law enforcement. Can we get that for March? Can we get that for another time in 2025? What's that look like? And then how does that bifurcate the issue of the way that part-time was designed versus what it's currently being used for to fill the gap for the workforce? Ken.
Hi, Mark. So just a thought. If we maintained the level 2 in March as is and didn't change it, would it be, and this is where we need Kim and your thoughts, would it be acceptable to create an FTO program that includes training from whether it's the sheriff's department, whether it's the academy or the courts, to in their FTO program certify them in the courtroom security, the transports, all of the 4 different subchapters of 2358 that outline what level 1 really looks like, as opposed to having them here and trying to offer that training here. Part of the reason I say that was we're with the current 80-hour that we hold here, the in-residence portion that we do, we were never able to offer the level 1, in part because at the time when Sheriff Bernard was looking at that, the realization came to folks that, hey, if we try to include all of this training on top of what we're already saying level 2 needs to look like, we are now at 3 or 4 weeks of additional, and that's not going to satisfy anybody's requirements or needs at that time. So if level 2 currently holds an FTO program with a minimum of 60 hours that is designed to produce a solo beat patrol officer at the end of that FTO period or that FTO program. Would it be acceptable, or would there be a mechanism by which they come do the exact same level 2 or something similar to the level 2 program that we already have, and then develop in the FTO program following their time here those same requirements for level 1? They complete that with their agencies, and at that point they are given a level 1 non-provisional.
Makes sense to me.
I know I'm stepping right into the morass that you just created. Well done walking me into that. I appreciate that. I'll cry openly later on in the corner. But that seems, just in the short term, that seems like if we're talking about trying to show both the council, the legislature, and the state that we're doing something short term, that seems like it might be the easiest way to make that happen. I would need Kim and Chris to really decide whether or not that's something that we can do on our end from a logistics standpoint, changing the FTO program in such a way as to make it amenable to the sheriffs and the folks that use those level 1 folks, while at the same time not diminishing what we're looking at for the level 2, because frankly, we're still behind the 8 ball, probably the wrong language, but where the level 2 scope is, we need more than 60 hours during FTO. It's just not, it's going to be a failure to train issue at some point. I think we've been really lucky so far that it hasn't, but it's just a matter of time. So it may be that we need to put this back on the agencies that truly use the level 1 to come up with what does that FTO time need to look like? What does that training need to look like? What are they comfortable with in terms of what, as sheriff's office or any other agency that intends to use them as a level 1? And then we certify that FTO program. We go through the same process. They submit that FTO packet at the conclusion of that process, and then the academy certifies them at that point as a non-provisional.
Kim, do you want to step into that morass?
Partially. With all of us just, again, not committing to anything right now, but just thinking out loud, I think if we were still rearranging that 2 weeks, the 80 hours of the 2 weeks in person, again, to focus on what does every officer who's wearing a uniform, who's carrying a gun, right? You're level 1, 2, or 3, like all citizens see you as the officer, they don't know. So if we were able to move the use of force, I think that's going to be a major issue for Chris and for me. So if we kind of played around with those first 2 weeks, and then this goes a little bit back, Mark, to what you've spoken about, sort of levels that build on top of each other, and not these completely separate silos that people are repeating things. So if we looked at it that way, what does that level 1 or level 2 officer need to know in those first 2 weeks before they go out to FTO? And then if the FTO then bifurcates level 1 FTO training, level 2 FTO training, and to Loretta's point earlier, and we've talked about that as well, and I know it was in Jason's point, the level 2 FTO, I think that's a massive place to do a lot of good work as far as hours and documentation and further training of our FTO instructors to really make sure that on-the-job training that we, the council, can say, we feel good about this, statewide, right? Not, oh, this agency does a good job, this agency like, that's very unsettling. So I think, Ken, I think we could play around with this idea, but I think we would still need to, that first 2 weeks, feel really good about what we are doing in the academy before we send folks out.
So,
Yeah, I don't mean to, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
no, by all means.
I was just gonna say that, so having said that, that's merely an idea that I'm throwing out there and that some of this might be able to be resolved in the FTO program. My personal feeling, and this is 100% my own feeling, I don't want to say this on behalf of Chris or the academy, is I'm still of the mindset that a cop is a cop is a cop, regardless of what level of training you possess in your certification. The public doesn't know. They just don't know. So when they come to someone, whether they're in a traffic detail or whether they're in patrol or whatever it is, they expect a certain level of both expertise and professionalism and all that stuff to be included. And when that person, by no fault of their own, is called to do something that might be outside their scope, well, guess what? All of the same rules apply. They are still, whether they're level 1, 2, or 3, able to intervene on behalf of extenuating circumstances and rapidly and devolving, messes that do happen in front of people occasionally. A courtroom officer is still going to have to be able to employ that same non-lethal use of force and use of force as any other officer in the state. So I'm still of the opinion that the training, sorry, Mark, for driving and for use of force and for firearms and for many of the other things still needs to be the same for everybody that we put through. And that's just my personal opinion on that. What I don't know is how to do that in a reasoned way at this point to make sure that we are serving all of the different agencies and all of the different performances that they have to engage with. So although the FTO might be an option in terms of separating or bifurcating the level 1, 2, and 3, I still don't know how we overcome the overall need for that use of force, firearms, all that basic or baseline training that I think every cop, regardless of what they're going to do, should have. Okay, I'm going to be quiet now.
I don't think you're overstepping and talking, Ken. If we were to pursue this idea, and I'm a big fan of getting all ideas on the table, good ideas and bad ideas, because I think it's a good way to brainstorm. But if we were to be able to pursue this idea of a level 1, these in-service requirements being accomplished during FTO, courtroom demeanor, courtroom security, handling a jury, stuff like that, which already occurs. That very much does happen. The sheriffs work with the judiciary to build out what that looks like. It's just not run through the academy, and I think that's fine, but no less. That is what happens right now. Would the idea be to have a level 1/level 2 academy in March, or would it be to have a level 1 academy separate from the level 2 academy in March? Loretta?
I'm just going to try to read what I think I'm hearing. So, from what Ken said, I agree with Ken. I think we all have to have that baseline because we're all officers. It doesn't matter where we're going to work. There are specialties that some of us pursue that others don't, though. And I agree. I think we could fix the FTO program so that maybe it's working for us in those separate phases. Like maybe we have more mandatory classes before somebody can get certified as an officer by themselves, get them certified. More hours, certainly, to push that liability where it needs to be. And maybe we have more courses. So that, say, a level 1, they go through the same academy in March, but they have like different courses they're taking so a level 1 could be certified as long as they have these classes. But if you want to move on to the level 2, you have to have all these as well. maybe it's not a different academy necessarily, but maybe like a different FTO program or like different classes in their FTO. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm hearing maybe we need.
I think this kind of ties back into what Jason has said previously about trying to pull in the JTA and saying what are the responsibilities, and then how do we align that to an FTO program? So not taking or asking anyone to commit to doing this idea, but just exploring the idea. Do we feel comfortable with a level 1/level 2 academy for phase 1? Which then you could hop onto the left side road or the right side road. And if you go left side, it's level 1, and you get in phase 2 and phase 3, you get trained for the level 1. If you decide you want to elevate to a level 2, you're going to have to accomplish what I'm calling the patrol school, but go to EVOC training, go to patrol procedures training, scenario-based training that is very much academy driven, similar to what level 3 has, which we've already identified as a gap. It doesn't, what I'm saying is that the level 1 wouldn't eliminate a person from going to level 2, but it allows for that flexibility to accomplish some of the things that it's currently almost limited in doing. Can I get like a thumbs up, thumbs down if this is a good idea or a bad idea?
I absolutely like that, but is that a possibility for the academy? I mean, we're gonna, the staff would have to say that's possible or not. I mean, and I'm more than willing to step up and help learn any instructing that we need to do to help out with the part-time program if we need to. So
certainly if the staff feels comfortable speaking, by all means, but if you also want to defer to the executive director and or further conversations, not holding anyone to anything, I just trying to move this snowball forward.
Definitely want to include the executive director in any of that conversation, regardless of what decision the committee makes. I think we'd need to, that's a significant amount of work if we're going to change or alter the way the level 2 currently looks, which is fine. I'm happy to start working that process. I think the current level 2, because we're roughly at half and half where students are concerned within the classes of folks that are going to really utilize the level 2 in its full scope, because there's a process either with the department going to level 3 or they're coming through as a waiver versus getting off the track at that point and going to level 1. I'm not sure how that would look just yet in terms of not altering the current level 2. We've already got folks signed up for the March level 2 school. So based on what agencies are going to have as an expectation of outcome, I think, again, I'd want to include Chris in that conversation, but I don't think we're going to be able to radically alter that too much from how it already exists, just based on agency expectation.
Yeah, and for any edification, what I suggest is that we try not to manipulate too much from what we currently have the resources to do and is currently expected, because then we can communicate it out with stakeholders over, let's say we make changes over the next 12 to 18 months. We can make communications with the various associations and other stakeholders to say, like, this is how level 2 will be changing. And now you have this level 1 option that lets you do stuff if we supported this recommendation and this approach. I think the process with stakeholders is going to be key on how we adjust level 2 long-term, or it will be fought, which is what we've seen historically.
But Mark, is your sense though, if the level 1 option was viable, there would probably be less resistance to a more robust level 2, however that looked, whether it was more time in person consecutively or whether it was required time back. Like if that was like, if that is increased, probably having a level 1 option balances that out. Is that your sense?
I think it would, because what it also, so going back to, I have 2 examples of employees right now. The one I've already talked about has a full-time job. If I were able to engage him more of a full-time context, I could probably capture him from his other job. Right now, because he has to work with a buddy all the time, he's very limited on what I have available. And so I'm not able to sustain him in full-time employ. If I had him in full-time employ and then said, hey, his back's fixed or shoulder, face, whatever it is that's broken, it's fixed, and now he can reasonably achieve a level 2 or level 3 certification, we would then apply him to that process. I have another person who's a small business owner. Same problem. If we could provide the number of hours for work, she would be happy to come work for me more hours than she is. But until I can provide those hours, she's very much working her business because that's what pays the bills. So if I had a level 1 for both of them, I could then start putting them to work right now, which then they might say, you know what, I want to do this profession change, and I want to go do the fun stuff. I don't want to be, we call them parking cones. I don't want to be a parking cone. I want to be able to go on patrol. I want to learn those things. So I think that we could see that be a balancing model to it. And I also, if we had the March class be level 1, level 2 for phase 1 only, I think the heavy lift would be for the FTO program, developing what a daily observation report would look like, because the San Jose model really contemplates nothing of the scope of practice of level 1, which then is almost a disservice, as well as this, I'm going to call it the CEC 1 because I don't know what the document's called, but that has a list of the training items. I think we would need to go through and really define what those 2 documents look like, which I'd be happy to contribute to. I think sheriffs would be happy to contribute to as welcome other stakeholders, but I know it's mostly our stuff. But I think that's where the heavy lift would be from what we're currently doing. And Ken, I don't know if you feel differently about that, but I think we're doing a lot of the things that you're saying. And so it might not, the work needs to be done to fill it into the San Jose model of FTO. But aside from that, all the other things are currently happening just in a different format. Jason, or I'm sorry, Rob?
I just had a couple of follow-up comments. One is I support the baseline foundation training because the public can't differentiate. But the other part is there is an opportunity within the level 1 in that you could actually have a better trained person as they get more focused into a specialty, as long as that scope is reasonably controlled. I would absolutely welcome it, because today, just again with the judiciary hat, that training and expertise, it's OJT through some SOP stuff. We might have them here at the judiciary for some levels of training, but if that were an opportunity, I could absolutely set up a judiciary level training that supported that phase 2, if you will, of a level 1 position. And I would have the resources to do it. It'd be obviously coordinated so that it looks like it's VPA sanctioned and meets those levels, but I have the resources to do it. As an example.
All right, we got 2 minutes left on the agenda. Any brilliant thoughts or seeds anyone want to plant? Hearing none, if people could go back to their relevant constituencies, ask if, I guess the question is, can the March class, please tell me to modify this if I should, can the March class be a level 1, 2 class if we could develop a level 1 certification curriculum that fits the council's needs? Basically, is that a possible viable route for March? The answer is no, it's no. Maybe that could be a viable route for March 2026. But if we could figure out whether this is a reasonable path forward in the short term, as well as in the long term, And we'll kick that around next week. And I assume everyone here got the memo, but we are going to be meeting weekly now. This time, because we need to get recommendations to the council for March. The recommendation, if you have any recommendations that we can make for March, let's bring those to next meeting as well, and we'll work on those sections of the draft report. Any other agenda items people want for our next meeting? All right. 1 minute left. Do we have any members of the public aside from Academy staff? See none. Anybody want to make any public comments? Hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Moved by Jason, seconded by Loretta. All in favor, say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, you can stay here by yourself. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, everyone.